After my recent health scare, my stepdaughter said, "You need to face reality about your future." At the recommendation of my physician, I agreed to start counseling sessions at an exclusive private clinic. On the very first day, I was stunned by what I discovered. I'm so glad you're here, Marie. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The medical papers were still scattered across my kitchen table when Sophie delivered her carefully worded suggestion. I was standing by the window, the same window where I'd watched thousands of sunrises with Marcus, when Sophie walked in with that determined expression I'd come to know so well. The expression that meant she'd already researched everything thoroughly, consulted with experts, and had a complete plan mapped out. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she approached, and I could see the concern etched in every line of her face. "Marie, we need to discuss your test results." She set her leather portfolio on the counter with practiced precision, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. At 42, Sophie had inherited her adoptive father's analytical mind and turned it into a successful marketing career. But more than that, she'd developed an almost protective instinct toward me that had grown stronger since Marcus's death. The doctor's recommendations are quite clear about what you need to do next. I was still processing the cardiologist's words from yesterday's appointment, still feeling the weight of hearing terms like stress-induced arrhythmia and comprehensive lifestyle modifications after 68 years of thinking my body was invincible. The medical terminology felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd forgotten I once knew fluently. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my teacup, the fine china rattling against the saucer in a way that made me feel suddenly fragile. "What exactly did Dr. Henderson say to you when he called?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, betraying the anxiety that had been building since I'd left his office. "That you need comprehensive support during this transition period." Sophie's voice was professional but warm, the tone she used when she was trying to be both authoritative and caring. "The clinic he recommended specializes in exactly this type of situation, and their success rates with patients facing similar challenges are exceptional." The teacup clinked against the saucer as I set it down, my hands still not quite steady. My heart felt like it was beating irregularly again, the way it had during the stress test when they'd made me walk on that treadmill while machines beeped and recorded every flutter. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the rapid rhythm that had become my new normal. "Sophie, I'm not sure I'm ready for counseling sessions. This is all happening so fast and I'm still trying to process what Dr. Henderson told me." "I understand, and I know it feels overwhelming." Sophie moved closer, her expression softening in the way it did when she was about to say something she knew I needed to hear but didn't want to. "But Marie, you have so much life ahead of you. The heart palpitations, the anxiety attacks, the insomnia. These are all manageable conditions with the right support system. You don't have to suffer through this alone." I sank into my chair, feeling every one of my 68 years settling into my bones like a heavy blanket. The chair Marcus used to sit in was still positioned across from mine, and I could almost see him there, encouraging me with that gentle smile he'd given me through every crisis we'd faced together. "I have my investment portfolio. The real estate dividends and stock returns should cover any medical expenses, even if they're extensive." My voice was stronger now, drawing on the financial independence I'd worked so hard to build. Sophie smiled gently, that patient expression she wore when she was about to redirect a conversation. "That's not the point, Marie. Dr. Henderson specifically mentioned this clinic because they take a holistic approach to cardiac recovery. It's not just about managing symptoms or paying bills. It's about helping you rediscover purpose and joy in your life after experiencing something this frightening." I looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who'd become my family through Marcus's first marriage. Sophie had been only 27 when I'd married her father, a driven young professional who'd initially been skeptical of her father's new wife. But over the 15 years of our marriage, we'd built something deeper than obligation, a genuine affection that had surprised us both. She'd been the one to drive me to medical appointments when Marcus was too weak, the one to help me navigate insurance claims, the one to hold my hand in hospital waiting rooms. "What kind of support are we talking about exactly?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Comprehensive wellness counseling, one-on-one sessions with their top specialist, someone who has extensive experience with patients transitioning through major life changes." Sophie pulled out her tablet and showed me the clinic's website, scrolling through testimonials and treatment philosophies. This particular doctor has helped hundreds of people navigate situations similar to yours. His approach is exactly what you need. Evidence-based, but also deeply compassionate. My stomach fluttered with nervous energy, the same sensation I'd felt in nursing school when I was about to take a particularly challenging exam. Sophie, I haven't been in formal counseling since my training programs decades ago. Modern therapeutic approaches have evolved so much since then. I wouldn't even know what to expect or how to prepare. It's not traditional therapy, Marie. It's more like life coaching, helping you process the health concerns and develop strategies for moving forward. You can absolutely do this. You're one of the strongest people I know. Sophie was already scrolling through her tablet, her efficiency both comforting and slightly overwhelming. I've already contacted them and explained your situation. You have a consultation scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff from sitting in the same position for too long. The morning light was shifting across the kitchen floor, creating patterns that reminded me of the way sunlight used to dance through the hospital windows during my nursing shifts all those years ago. And if I'm not comfortable with their approach, if I don't feel like it's the right fit, Sophie looked at me with genuine concern, the kind of expression that reminded me why I'd grown to love her so much. Then we'll find another option. We'll keep looking until we find something that feels right. But Marie, you can't let fear of the unknown keep you from taking care of yourself. You've always been the one taking care of everyone else. Now it's time to let someone take care of you. The next morning, I found myself standing outside a private medical building that looked like it belonged in a luxury resort rather than a medical complex. The architecture was modern yet welcoming, with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the morning sky, and carefully landscaped gardens that seemed designed to calm the nervous energy of arriving patients. Fountains trickled softly near the entrance, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air. My hands shook slightly as I approached the reception desk, and I wondered how a routine cardiac screening had led to this moment. At 68, I was seeking professional help for anxiety I'd never even acknowledged existed before. The admission felt like a small defeat, even though I knew it was probably a sign of strength. A composed woman in her 50s greeted me in the marble-floored lobby, her presence immediately calming. She was dressed in elegant but professional attire, with silver hair styled in a way that suggested both competence and warmth. Mrs. Marie, I'm Elena, Dr. Arthur's care coordinator. It's such a pleasure to meet you. Her voice had a slight accent I couldn't place, and when she smiled, I felt some of my nervousness begin to ease. Please come with me, and I'll show you to Dr. Arthur's office. The interior of the clinic was even more impressive than the outside. Soft lighting created a warm ambiance. Original artwork adorned the walls, and comfortable seating areas were arranged throughout the space in a way that felt more like a high-end hotel than a medical facility. The floors were polished hardwood rather than sterile linoleum, and plants flourished in every corner. Eleanor led me through corridors lined with certificates and awards from prestigious medical institutions, each one mounted in elegant frames that spoke to the clinic's attention to detail. Dr. Arthur specializes in transition counseling for clients facing significant life changes. Eleanor explained as we walked, her pace unhurried and considerate. He's worked with individuals managing everything from career transitions to health diagnoses to major life losses. And his approach is both compassionate and highly effective. Many of his clients describe their work with him as life-changing. I nodded, trying to absorb this information while also taking in the surroundings. Everything about this place suggested success, competence, and a deep understanding of how to help people through difficult times. We stopped outside a set of mahogany doors, their rich wood grain catching the light from the hallway fixtures. Before we go in, I should mention that Dr. Arthur is quite thorough in his initial assessments. He believes that understanding the full scope of a client's situation is essential for effective treatment. Elena's expression was reassuring but serious. He's worked with over 200 clients in the past 5 years, and his success rate with individuals facing health-related anxiety is remarkable. I think you'll find him both professional and surprisingly easy to talk to. My heart rate quickened, that familiar flutter that had become my constant companion since the cardiac episode. Such impressive credentials. Yet I felt nervous about whether I'd be able to articulate my feelings properly, whether I'd be able to live up to the clinic's obvious standards. Elena opened the doors to reveal a beautifully appointed office that took my breath away. The space was large but somehow intimate, with a wall of windows overlooking a tranquil garden where morning light filtered through carefully pruned trees. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with medical texts and what appeared to be literature and philosophy books. A comfortable seating area was arranged near the windows, and soft music played almost imperceptibly in the background. And there, seated behind an elegant desk made of what looked like reclaimed wood, was a distinguished man with silver hair and the kind of intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through to your thoughts. "Dr. Arthur, this is Marie, the client we discussed." Elena's voice was warm as she made the introduction. He looked up from his notes and I felt an unexpected flutter of recognition that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. His eyes were a deep blue, the kind that reminded me of summer skies and long-forgotten memories I couldn't quite place. When his gaze met mine, something flickered across his expression. A moment of confusion, perhaps, or curiosity. "Murray?" His voice was warm and professional, with a slight accent that seemed familiar in a way I couldn't identify. "Please, have a seat wherever you feel most comfortable." I chose the chair closest to the windows, drawn to the view of the garden and the way the morning light seemed to make everything feel more hopeful. The chair was leather, buttery soft, and perfectly positioned to encourage both relaxation and conversation. I settled into it, trying to ignore how my pulse had suddenly accelerated in a way that felt different from my usual anxiety. There was something about his presence, about the way he looked at me, that made me feel both nervous and strangely comforted. It was as if he was seeing not just my current distress, but something deeper, something I'd forgotten about myself. "Elena tells me you're a former nurse," he said, his attention completely focused on me in a way that felt both professional and intensely personal. It was as if he was studying not just my words, but my entire being, reading the story written in my posture and expression. "Yes, that's right. Many years ago, before I married Marcus." My voice came out steadier than I felt, though I noticed my hands were still trembling slightly. "I specialized in cardiac care, actually, which makes this whole situation feel rather ironic. And you've recently experienced some health concerns that have brought you here." It wasn't a question, but a statement delivered with such gentle understanding that I felt some of my defensive walls begin to crumble. "I understand this has been a particularly difficult transition for you." "Thank you for understanding." I glanced down at my hands, still wearing Marcus's wedding ring, the simple gold band that had been my anchor through 15 years of marriage. It's been overwhelming in ways I didn't expect. When I looked up again, Arthur was still studying me with that intense, almost searching expression. There was something in his eyes that made me feel like he was looking for something specific, some piece of a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Have we met before, Marie? There's something familiar about you, something I can't quite place." My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a flush of heat rise to my cheeks. I forced myself to smile politely, though my heart was racing for reasons I couldn't understand. "I don't believe so, Dr. Arthur. I think I would remember meeting you." But even as I said it, something was stirring in my memory. Something about the way he tilted his head when he spoke, the cadence of his voice, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Something that made my hands tremble and my breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. "Perhaps not," he said thoughtfully, but his gaze remained fixed on my face as if he was memorizing every detail. "Sometimes we encounter people who remind us of others, or perhaps of dreams we've had." He paused, then leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Marie, what brings you to seek counseling at this particular point in your life?" The honest answer was that I was terrified, that my body was betraying me in ways I didn't understand, that at 68 I was facing mortality for the first time in a real and immediate way, that I felt like I was drowning in uncertainty and needed someone to throw me a lifeline. But I couldn't say that, not yet. Instead, I said, "I believe in taking control of my health and my future. I've always been someone who faces challenges head-on rather than avoiding them." Something in his expression warmed as if my answer had pleased him in some way. "And you're not intimidated by the process of self-examination? By the possibility of uncovering things about yourself that you might not have acknowledged before?" I thought about Sophie's gentle insistence, about the medical appointments and test results, about sleeping alone in the house Marcus and I had shared for so many years, about the way silence had become my constant companion, broken only by the irregular rhythm of my own heartbeat. "No, Dr. Arthur. I'm not intimidated by truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Arthur nodded slowly, as if my answer had confirmed something he'd been hoping to hear. Eleanor, would you give us some privacy? I'd like to speak with Marie alone. After Eleanor left, closing the doors behind her with a soft click, Arthur came around his desk and sat in the chair beside mine. The movement was fluid, despite what I now noticed was a slight stiffness in his left leg, as if he'd overcome some kind of injury. Marie, I want to be completely transparent with you about my approach and expectations. His voice was gentle but serious. My work is intensive and requires complete honesty from both of us. I don't believe in surface-level conversations or quick fixes. I work with clients who are ready to examine their lives deeply and make meaningful changes. He quoted a fee that made my heart skip. Though not from shock, it was well within my investment portfolio's capacity, more than I'd ever spent on healthcare. But somehow it felt appropriate for what he was offering. However, he continued, I need to know that you're prepared for this journey, that you won't hold back important information or treat this as a casual consultation. This kind of work requires courage and commitment. Can you give me that level of engagement? I looked into those penetrating blue eyes and felt that strange flutter of recognition again, stronger this time. There was something about the way he spoke about courage and commitment that resonated with something deep inside me, something I'd forgotten I possessed. Yes, Dr. Arthur, I can commit to that. Excellent. He reached out to shake my hand, and when our fingers touched, I felt a jolt of connection that had nothing to do with static electricity. It was like touching a live wire, but instead of pain, there was warmth, recognition, a sense of coming home to something I'd lost. Welcome to your new beginning, Marie. The way he said my name with such warmth and what seemed like genuine affection made my heart race in a way that was entirely different from my anxiety episodes. I pulled my hand back quickly, reminding myself that he was a medical professional, that I was here for treatment, not to develop inappropriate feelings. I was a widow, for heaven's sake, a woman dealing with serious health concerns. I had no business feeling anything beyond professional respect for this man. But as Elena showed me to the parking garage later that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. The way Dr. Arthur had looked at me, like he was seeing someone from a half-remembered dream, made me wonder if I was about to uncover something I'd buried deep in my past. Something that might change everything I thought I knew about myself. My first week of sessions at the clinic felt like stepping into a different world, one where my thoughts and feelings were treated as worthy of serious attention. The treatment room Arthur had assigned for our meetings was larger than my entire living room, furnished with comfortable seating that seemed designed to encourage honesty and self-reflection. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of safety, and the view of the healing garden provided a constant reminder that growth and renewal were possible even in the most challenging circumstances. But every morning when I drove to the clinic, I felt the weight of my new reality settling on my shoulders. At 68, I was essentially starting over, learning to navigate anxiety and health concerns I'd never acknowledged before, admitting that I needed help in ways I'd never imagined. Arthur was exactly as Eleanor had described, thorough, insightful, and blessed with a gentle persistence that made me examine thoughts I'd been avoiding for years. He wanted to explore my relationship with Marcus, my feelings about aging and mortality, my fears about the future and what it might hold. His questions were precise and thoughtful, delivered with a combination of professional expertise and genuine caring that made me feel safe enough to be vulnerable. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, sharing concerns and dreams I'd never voiced aloud. But there were moments, quiet moments between his professional inquiries, when I would catch him looking at me with that same searching expression from our first meeting. It was as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that had been troubling him for years, studying my face for clues to something he couldn't quite remember. During these moments, the professional distance between us seemed to shimmer and fade, replaced by something more personal, more intimate. Marie, he said during our Thursday session as I settled into my usual chair by the window. That's such a distinctive name. I don't think I've encountered it very often in my practice. He paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. Is it a family name? I paused in the act of arranging my purse, surprised by the personal nature of the question. Yes, my grandmother's name. She was from Germany, immigrated here as a young woman. My voice carried a warmth it always did when I spoke of her. She was an extraordinary woman, very independent and strong-willed. German heritage, he repeated thoughtfully, as if the information meant something specific to him. That's fascinating. And where did you grow up? I'm trying to get a sense of your background, your formative experiences. Several places. I kept my voice steady, but my heart rate had increased in that familiar way. My father's work required frequent moves when I was young. It wasn't entirely untrue, though the reality had been more complicated. We had moved often, but it was more about my father's restless nature and tendency to chase opportunities that never quite materialized than any specific career demands. Some chapters of life were better left unexamined, especially in a therapeutic setting. That afternoon, after our session, I finally decided to tackle a project I'd been avoiding since moving to my smaller house. Sophie had helped me relocate some personal items from the larger home I'd shared with Marcus, and I'd been putting off sorting through the boxes that now sat in my spare bedroom. Most of the contents were practical financial documents I needed to organize, medical records that might be relevant to my current health concerns, insurance papers that required filing. But at the bottom of one box, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was something I'd forgotten I still had. My old photograph albums. I'd packed them without thinking, probably because they'd been in my bedside drawer where I'd been looking through them during those first lonely evenings after Marcus's funeral. They'd been a source of comfort then, reminding me of happier times when life felt more certain. Now, sitting in my comfortable chair by the window with afternoon light streaming across the pages, I unwrapped them with hands that trembled slightly. The first album contained photos from my marriage to Marcus, our wedding day, Sophie's college graduation, family holidays, decades of comfortable, secure memories that documented a life well lived. I set it aside and reached for the older album, one I rarely opened anymore. The cover was worn blue leather, faded at the edges and cracked from age. Inside were photographs from before Marcus, before marriage, before the carefully structured life I'd built for myself. The first pages showed familiar scenes: nursing school graduation, friends from my youth laughing at some long-forgotten joke, my parents looking hopeful and young in a way that broke my heart. But as I turned the pages, my breathing became shallow and my pulse quickened. There, on page 15, was a photograph that made the room spin around me. I was young in the picture, maybe 22, wearing a white summer dress that I'd thought made me look sophisticated. My hair was long and dark, styled in the fashion of the early 1970s, and I was laughing at something off camera. My face was bright with the kind of pure happiness that only comes from being completely in love. And standing beside me, his hand resting possessively on my shoulder, his expression full of adoration and promise, was a young man with dark hair and striking blue eyes. Arthur! My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the album, and I had to set it carefully on the table beside me. Not Dr. Arthur, but Arthur from 30 years ago, when we were both young and believed anything was possible. Arthur, who had talked passionately about changing the world through compassionate healthcare. Arthur, who had held me close during thunderstorms and promised we'd build something beautiful together. Arthur, who had graduated from his doctoral program and moved across the country for an opportunity we both knew was too good to pass up. Arthur, whom I'd loved with every fibre of my being, and then lost to distance and time and the relentless demands of ambitious careers. I stared at the photograph until my vision blurred, trying to reconcile the young man in the picture with the distinguished doctor I'd been seeing for sessions. The bone structure was the same: those defined cheekbones, the strong jawline, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. But the young Arthur had been eager and optimistic, full of plans and dreams for changing the world through his work. This Dr. Arthur was controlled, successful, measured in his responses, carrying himself with the authority that came from years of professional achievement. What had transformed one into the other? What had those 30 years held for him? I turned the page with shaking hands and found more photographs, each one bringing back memories I thought I'd successfully buried. Arthur and me at a graduation party, both of us looking like we believed the future was ours for the taking. Arthur helping me study for final exams, both of us surrounded by textbooks and coffee cups, his presence making even the most difficult materials seem manageable. Arthur and me at the lake where we used to go to escape the pressures of school, my head resting against his shoulder, both of us looking completely content with the world. In every photo, we looked like two people who had found something precious and rare, something worth building a life around. The last photograph in the series was taken the day before he left for his new position across the country. We were standing by my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, his suitcase visible in the background. I was trying not to cry, but the tears were clearly threatening to spill over. I remembered that day with crystal clarity now, the way he'd held my hands, the promises he'd made, the plans we'd discussed for maintaining our relationship across the distance. He was holding my hands in the photo, his expression serious and determined. "I'm going to make a real difference, Marie," he'd said, his voice full of conviction and hope. "I'm going to build something important, something that will help people heal. And when I'm established, when I've proven myself, we'll have the foundation to build our life together. Will you wait for me?" And I had promised I would with every fibre of my being. I had meant it with my whole heart. But months had turned into years, and the distance had proven more challenging than either of us had anticipated. His calls became less frequent as his new position demanded more of his time and energy. My letters went unanswered for longer periods. I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd found success in private practice, was building a reputation as a gifted therapist. But by then I'd met Marcus. Gentle, stable Marcus who loved me without conditions, who didn't need to save the world to prove his worth, who was present and available and ready to build a life together immediately. I'd married Marcus 2 years after Arthur had moved away, when it became clear that our grand plans for the future had been just that. Plans, not reality. There was a letter tucked behind the last photograph, yellowed with age but still readable. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, though I knew exactly what it contained. The letter I'd read so many times I could recite it from memory. The letter that had arrived too late to change anything. "My dearest Marie," it began in his familiar handwriting, each word carefully formed. "I've established my practice and I'm finally ready to build the life we dreamed about. The work has been more demanding than I anticipated, but I'm finally in a position where I can offer you the stability and security you deserve. I'm coming home next month and I hope we can begin where we left off. I've found a house for us, a place where we can put down roots and create the future we always talked about. All my love, all my hopes, all my dreams are with you. Always yours, Arthur." The letter was dated 6 months after my wedding to Marcus, when I was still adjusting to married life and trying to convince myself I'd made the right choice. I pressed the letter to my chest and felt tears falling, 30 years of suppressed emotion finally finding release. All these years I'd wondered if Arthur had simply moved on, if our connection had been just a youthful romance that faded with time and distance. I'd convinced myself that his silence meant he'd found someone else, someone more suited to the successful life he was building. But he had tried to come back. He had built something meaningful just as he'd promised. He had kept his word even when I hadn't been able to keep mine. I had simply already chosen a different path, one that seemed safer and more certain at the time. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts, and I quickly hid the album and letter in my desk drawer, wiping my eyes and trying to compose myself. "Come in." My housekeeper entered, her expression concerned in the way it had been ever since my health scare. "Mrs. Marie, Dr. Arthur's office called. He's asking if you could come in tomorrow for an additional session." Eleanor said he seemed quite insistent about it. I smoothed my hair and tried to steady my breathing, wondering if my emotional turmoil was visible on my face. Could he have remembered something during our session today? Was that why he'd been watching me with such intensity? I found myself both terrified and curious about what tomorrow might bring. "Tell them I'll be there," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Same time as usual. That evening, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with memories and possibilities. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Arthur's young face from those photographs, heard his voice making promises about our future, felt the warmth of his hand in mine. And somewhere across town, in whatever home he'd built for himself, the man he'd become was probably lying awake too, perhaps piecing together the same memories that were making my heart race. The recognition in his eyes, the way he'd studied my face, the familiar cadence of his voice, it all made sense now. We had found each other again, after 30 years of separate lives and different choices. The question was, what were we going to do about it? By morning, I'd made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep participating in sessions while hiding such a fundamental truth. The uncertainty was affecting my health, which was the opposite of what these sessions were supposed to achieve. If Arthur was remembering our past, if he was experiencing the same recognition I was, it was better to address it directly than let it interfere with my treatment. Better to face the truth than let it compromise the healing process we'd both committed to. I owed it to both of us to be honest about what I was beginning to remember. I arrived at the clinic early and found Arthur in his office, standing by the window overlooking the garden. He was perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, and there was something in his posture that suggested he'd been wrestling with his own thoughts all night. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, and for a moment I could see both versions of him superimposed. The young man full of idealism and the accomplished professional he'd become. "Good morning, Dr. Arthur." I took my usual seat, my hands surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. He turned from the window and I saw something different in his expression. Not the professional composure I'd grown accustomed to, but something more vulnerable, more uncertain. His eyes held a question I wasn't sure either of us was ready to answer. "Thank you for coming in early. I hope you slept well." "No," I said honestly, deciding that this was the moment for complete truth. "Did you?" A slight smile touched his lips, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him that wasn't filtered through professional distance. "No. I kept thinking about nursing school and summer dresses and that lake where we used to study for our comprehensive exams." My breath caught, and I felt my heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. There was no point in denying it anymore, no reason to maintain the pretense. The lake was too cold for swimming. "You always said we should find somewhere warmer to spend our Sunday afternoons." But I liked the quiet, the way it made studying feel less like work. Arthur closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they were bright with recognition and something that might have been relief. "Marie Elizabeth Brennan, you wore a small gold cross necklace that had belonged to your grandmother, and you had a tiny scar on your right hand from a childhood accident with a broken glass." I touched my throat automatically where the cross used to rest before I'd put it away after Marcus's death. "You gave me a book of poetry, something by Pablo Neruda, and inscribed it with a promise that we'd read it together someday when we had more time to appreciate beauty." His voice was barely above a whisper, filled with wonder and something that might have been longing. "I still have it. I've carried it with me through every move, every major life change." We looked at each other across the space that separated us, and I felt the years collapsing between us. Not just the few feet between his chair and mine, but the decades of different choices, different paths, different kinds of love. The professional boundaries that had defined our recent interactions seemed to dissolve, replaced by something more fundamental and true. "Why didn't you tell me who you were when you first recognized me?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. I sank deeper into my chair, suddenly feeling the weight of all the years between us. "Because I was uncertain. Because I'm not the girl you remember anymore. And I wasn't sure you'd want to know the woman I've become." I paused, gathering courage. "Because you're not the boy I remember either." And I wasn't sure how to bridge that gap. Arthur nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his eyes. "When I learned you'd married Marcus, I was devastated. I told myself you'd never truly cared about me, that you'd been waiting for someone more stable, more practical than the idealistic young man I was then." "That's not true." The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended, carrying 30 years of suppressed emotion. "I waited, Arthur. I waited until I couldn't wait any longer, until the silence became unbearable. Your calls became infrequent, your letters stopped coming, and I thought..." I wiped away a tear that had escaped despite my efforts to remain composed. "I thought you'd found something more important than what we had. Someone who fit better into the successful life you were building." "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "But my mentors convinced me that maintaining a long-distance relationship would compromise my ability to establish my practice effectively. They suggested I focus completely on my career first, then reconnect when I was in a position to offer you the life you deserved." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our youth. "By the time I realized they were wrong, by the time I understood that success meant nothing without someone to share it with, you were already married. I was too late. The cruelty of the timing hit me like a physical blow, and I felt anger flare on behalf of both our younger selves. All those years of wondering, of feeling abandoned, when Arthur had simply been following well-intentioned but misguided advice. All those years he'd spent building a successful practice while carrying the weight of losing me. "I kept track of your life," Arthur continued, his voice growing softer. Nothing intrusive, just, "I needed to know you were living well, that you were happy. I knew when you moved to the suburbs with Marcus, when he received his promotion at the bank, when he became ill. He paused, his expression growing more vulnerable. I even knew when he passed away. I wanted to reach out to offer condolences, but I didn't know if my presence would be welcome or appropriate. I stared at him, amazed by the revelation. You've been aware of my life all this time? From a distance. I never interfered, never tried to make contact directly. I needed to know you were living well, that you'd found the happiness and security you deserved. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small leather journal, worn from years of handling. And I kept hoping that somehow, someday, life would give us another chance to find each other again. With careful hands, he opened the journal to reveal pressed flowers, ticket stubs, and photographs, all carefully preserved from our time together 30 years ago. Each item was a memory, a moment we'd shared, a piece of the life we'd planned to build together. You kept everything, I whispered, touched by the care he'd taken to preserve these remnants of our past. I kept everything. Every memory, every moment, every dream we shared. He looked down at the journal, his expression tender. I never married Marie. I told myself it was because I was too dedicated to my work, too focused on building something meaningful. But the truth was much simpler and more painful. No one else was you. No one else could make me feel the way you had, could inspire me to be the man I wanted to become. The weight of his words settled around us like a gentle blanket, and I felt something inside me that had been tightly controlled for decades finally begin to unfurl. 30 years of professional success, of helping others heal, of building a respected practice, all while carrying the memory of what we'd shared. Arthur, I didn't know what to say. How to acknowledge a lifetime of what-ifs and might-have-beens. How do you respond to learning that someone has loved you faithfully for 30 years, even from a distance? I don't regret my marriage to Marcus, he said gently as if reading my thoughts. He was a good man. He loved you the way you deserved to be loved, and he was there when I couldn't be. I've made my peace with that, with the choices we both made. Have you? I asked softly, studying his face for signs of the truth. Because the man I've been working with these past weeks seems to carry a lot of unresolved sadness, a kind of loneliness that success can't touch. Arthur's expression grew more serious, more vulnerable than I'd seen it since our sessions began. My accident changed everything. 3 years ago, I was in a car crash that left me with significant mobility issues. I spent months in physical therapy learning to walk again, dealing with chronic pain. He gestured toward his legs, and I noticed again the slight stiffness in his movements. It was during that time lying in a hospital bed that I realized how much of my life I'd spent waiting for something that might never come. I thought about you constantly, wondered if you were happy, if you ever thought about what we'd had. His voice grew quieter, and I thought, what could I offer you now? A man who's no longer physically whole, who might never be the strong, capable person you remembered. Stop! I stood up abruptly, feeling anger flash through me like lightning. Just stop. Do you think I'm so superficial that your physical condition matters more than your heart? Do you think I'm the kind of person who would turn away from someone I cared about because they faced challenges? He looked surprised by my intensity, by the emotion in my voice. Marie, I cared about you, Arthur. Not your potential success, not your perfect health, not your ability to provide for me. I was pacing now, 30 years of suppressed emotions flowing out like a dam bursting. I cared about the person who stayed up all night helping me study for final exams. The person who listened to me worry about my future and made me believe I could accomplish anything. The person who believed in making the world better through compassion and service to others. I stopped pacing and looked directly at him. I cared about the person who brought me wildflowers because he couldn't afford roses, who held me when I cried about my father's drinking, who made me laugh until my sides hurt. And if that person is still here, then everything else is just details. Arthur reached for my hand and I let him take it, feeling the familiar electricity of connection. His fingers were older now, marked by years of work and service, but his touch still felt like coming home after a long journey. He's still here, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Sometimes buried under professional obligations and carefully constructed boundaries. Sometimes hidden behind the walls I built to protect myself from further loss. But still here, still caring, still hoping. He squeezed my hand gently. The question is, what do we do with this recognition? How do we honor what we had while acknowledging who we've become? I looked around his office at the life of service and healing he'd built, at the certificates and awards that testified to his success. Then I looked back at his face, searching for the answer to a question I'd been afraid to ask. Are you fulfilled, Arthur? Really fulfilled by the life you've created? He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same thoroughness he brought to his professional work. I've helped people heal. I've built a successful practice that serves those who need it most. I've earned respect in my field and contributed to the profession I love. He paused, his expression growing more introspective. But fulfilled, complete, no. I don't think I've felt truly whole since the day I left you to pursue my career. There's always been something missing, some part of myself that I left behind. Then maybe, I said carefully, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was suggesting. It's time to stop letting the past define our future. Maybe it's time to see what the people we've become could create together. Arthur brought my hand to his lips and kissed it softly, the gesture both tender and reverent. Would you be willing to explore that possibility? Not as my patient, but as whatever we might become to each other. I thought about Sophie, about the careful life I'd built with Marcus, about the health concerns that had brought me to his clinic. I thought about the quiet house where I now lived alone, about the future I'd been too frightened to imagine. Then I looked at the man who had shaped my understanding of what it meant to truly connect with another person, who had loved me faithfully for 30 years, even from a distance. Yes, I whispered, my voice filled with conviction. I'd like to explore that. But even as the words left my lips, I knew our path wouldn't be simple. Sophie would have questions about this development. Serious questions about my judgment and emotional stability. My stepdaughter had always been protective of Marcus's memory, and she certainly wouldn't expect her stepmother to reconnect with a love from the past. The thought of explaining this to Sophie, of helping her understand the complexity of the situation, made my stomach flutter with anxiety. But for the first time in years, I also felt something else stirring within me. Hope. The possibility that it wasn't too late for second chances. That love could survive even the longest separations. Maybe some connections were strong enough to transcend time and circumstance. 3 weeks after our recognition in Arthur's office, he suggested we begin what he called relationship counseling sessions. Not as doctor and patient, but as two people exploring the possibility of a renewed connection after decades of separation. The concept felt both thrilling and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and being asked to trust that there was solid ground on the other side. You don't have to decide immediately, he said over coffee in the clinic's garden cafe, a space designed for informal conversations between sessions. The setting was beautiful, with flowering plants and a small fountain that created a peaceful atmosphere. But Marie, I want you to know that this isn't about convenience or nostalgia. This is about the connection we've always shared, and whether it's strong enough to build something meaningful in the present. I set down my coffee cup, my appetite suddenly gone as the weight of the decisions settled on my shoulders. Arthur, I need to tell you something about Sophie, something that might complicate this situation. His expression grew attentive, that focused way he had of listening that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. What about her? She doesn't know about our history. When she found your clinic, she was simply following Dr. Henderson's recommendation. A respected doctor who could help me process my health concerns and transition into this new phase of my life. I paused, gathering my thoughts. She has no idea we knew each other before. No idea that what brought me here was more than just medical referral. Arthur nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious. And you think she'll be concerned about our relationship? About the change in our professional dynamic? I laughed, but there was nervous tension in the sound. My stepdaughter has spent the last year helping me navigate Marcus's death and my health issues. She's invested in my stability and well-being in a way that's both touching and sometimes overwhelming. I looked out at the garden, watching other patients and their families moving through the space. When she finds out I'm involved with someone from my past, someone who was initially my therapist, she's going to want to make sure I'm making healthy choices. She's going to want to protect me from potential harm. Am I potential harm? Arthur asked gently, his voice carrying genuine concern. Are you worried that I might not be a healthy choice for you? I looked at him with surprise, touched by his willingness to question himself. Of course not. Why would you ask that? Because 30 years is a long time, Marie. People change in fundamental ways. The person you loved then might not be compatible with the person you've become. He gestured around the elegant clinic setting. And my work comes with certain responsibilities and professional boundaries that could complicate a personal relationship. I felt a flash of hurt, wondering if he was having second thoughts about what we'd acknowledged between us. If you're reconsidering this, just say so. I'd rather know now than invest emotionally in something you're not sure about. No, that's not what I mean. His voice was gentle but firm, and he reached across the small table to touch my hand. I needed to know that you're prepared for the complexity of this situation, that you're not romanticizing our past or overlooking the practical considerations of building a relationship now. I remained quiet for a moment, considering his words and the concern behind them. What practical considerations? That we're different people now, with different needs and expectations. That we've both experienced loss and change in ways that have shaped us. That the foundation we're building needs to be based on who we are today, not who we were 30 years ago. His expression was serious, professional, even in this personal moment. I need to know that you understand the difference between nostalgia and genuine compatibility. I understand that. You should trust that I understand that. I felt a flash of irritation at being analysed even in this intimate moment. I'm not a naive young woman anymore, Arthur. I've been married, I've experienced loss, I've built a life. I know the difference between fantasy and reality. Arthur reached for my hand, his touch both apologetic and reassuring. You're right. I should trust your judgment. And I do. But Marie, you have to understand, when you work in my field, you learn to be cautious about the intersection of personal and professional relationships. I felt my defensiveness soften as I recognized the genuine concern in his voice. Is that really how you've lived all these years? Always maintaining professional distance. Always questioning your own emotions. Mostly. He looked thoughtful, almost sad. It seemed like the safest approach, especially after I realized how much I'd lost by not fighting for us years ago. I didn't want to risk making another mistake, another choice I'd regret. I studied his face, seeing the careful composure he maintained even now, even in this moment of acknowledged intimacy. This was what a lifetime of professional success had taught him. To protect himself by keeping everyone at arm's length, by analyzing every emotion before allowing himself to feel it. For what it's worth, I said quietly, I'm not interested in your professional status or your clinic's reputation. I'm not impressed by your success or your credentials. I paused, making sure he understood the importance of what I was saying. I'm interested in you, the person who remembers what I looked like in summer dresses and still keeps flowers from our college years. The person who helped me believe in myself when I was too scared to try. Relief flooded his features, and I saw something in his expression relax. I needed to hear that. I needed to know that you were seeing me, not just the life I've built. Good. Now about Sophie. When she learns about this development, she's going to want to meet with both of us. She's going to want to understand the situation fully before she can support it. Are you comfortable with that level of scrutiny? I think it's necessary. She deserves to know that this isn't some impulsive decision, that we have a real history together, that what we're exploring is based on genuine connection, not just loneliness or nostalgia. Arthur's expression grew more serious, and I could see him shifting into his professional mode. What kind of questions do you think she'll ask? Everything. How we met, why we separated, what our intentions are now. She's going to want to know about your professional ethics, about whether you've violated any boundaries. I felt my stomach clench as I imagined the conversation. She's going to want to make sure you're not taking advantage of my emotional vulnerability, that you haven't manipulated the therapeutic relationship for personal gain. And have I? Arthur asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern. Have I taken advantage of your vulnerability? I looked at him seriously, considering the question with the same thoroughness he brought to his professional work. No. If anything, you've helped me remember parts of myself I'd forgotten. Parts that have nothing to do with being Marcus's wife or Sophie's stepmother. You've helped me rediscover who I am as an individual. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I saw Sophie's name on the screen. Speaking of Sophie, I said, showing Arthur the message. She wants to have dinner tomorrow night. She probably wants to check on how my counselling sessions are progressing. I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Are you going to tell her about us? I think it's time. Better to be honest than have her find out some other way. Better to control the narrative than let her imagine something worse than reality. Arthur nodded, understanding the wisdom in my approach. Would you like me to be there for the conversation? Not for the initial discussion, but I think she'll want to meet you properly after I explain the situation, after she's had time to process the information. That night, I lay in bed thinking about how to explain this to Sophie, how to help her understand the complexity of what Arthur and I had discovered. How do you tell someone that your therapeutic relationship has become personal? How do you explain that sometimes the past resurfaces in the most unexpected ways, bringing opportunities for healing that go beyond conventional treatment? But as I drifted off to sleep, I held on to Arthur's words from our session, the connection we've always shared. Maybe Sophie would understand that some bonds transcend time and circumstance, that some kinds of love are worth exploring no matter how complicated the situation might appear. I met Sophie at our usual restaurant, the one near her office where we'd shared so many conversations about Marcus's illness and my adjustment to widowhood. The familiar setting felt appropriate for what I knew would be a significant conversation, one that might change our relationship in ways I couldn't predict. She arrived looking professional and composed, as always, but I could see the concern in her eyes, the way she studied my face as if looking for signs of distress. "Marie, you look different," she said as she settled into her chair across from me. "Good different. More energetic, more alive, I guess. I feel more energetic." I ordered my usual tea, hoping the ritual would help calm my nerves. The counselling sessions have been very helpful, more so than I expected when you first suggested them. That's wonderful to hear. Dr. Arthur's approach is working well for you. Yes, but Sophie, there's something I need to tell you about Dr. Arthur. Something that changes the nature of our relationship. Her expression grew more focused, and I could see her shifting into the analytical mode that had made her successful in her marketing career. What about him? We knew each other before. Many years ago, before I married Marcus. We were. I paused, gathering courage. We were very close. Sophie set down her wineglass, her full attention now focused on me. You knew each other how? In what context? We were in love. We had planned to build a life together, but circumstances separated us when he moved away for his career. I watched her expression carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. I had no idea he was the doctor you'd found until I walked into his office that first day. How close were you? Sophie's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the concern underneath. We were planning to marry. We had talked about our future, about the life we wanted to build together. But when he got an opportunity across the country, we thought we could maintain the relationship long distance. I felt tears threaten as I remembered the pain of that separation. We were wrong. The distance proved too difficult and we lost touch. I thought I'd never see him again. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same thoroughness she brought to her professional work. And now? Now we're exploring whether what we had was real enough to survive 30 years and all the changes we've both experienced. You're dating your therapist? Her voice carried a note of alarm that I'd been expecting. He's no longer my therapist. We've transitioned to a different kind of relationship, with appropriate professional boundaries and oversight. Sophie leaned back in her chair, and I could see her mind working through the implications. Marie, I'm not sure this is a good idea. You're vulnerable right now, dealing with health concerns and grief. Are you sure you're thinking clearly about this situation? I'm sure. And Sophie, I need you to trust my judgment on this. I'm not a child, and I'm not incapable of making rational decisions about my own life. But what if he's taking advantage of your emotional state? What if he's not the person you remember from 30 years ago? Her voice carried genuine concern, and I appreciated her protectiveness even as it frustrated me. Then I'll figure that out as we go. But I can't make decisions based on what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. I have to trust my instincts and my ability to assess the situation. Sophie was quiet again, then said with the directness I'd come to expect from her, I'd like to meet him. Properly. Not as your doctor, but as whatever he is to you now. I was hoping you'd say that. When? Whenever you're ready. He's prepared to answer any questions you have, to address any concerns you might raise. Sophie nodded slowly, and I could see her making mental notes. This weekend. Dinner at my house. I want to understand what I'm dealing with here, what kind of man he is. Sophie, you're not dealing with anything. This is my life, my choice to make. I know. But I care about you, and I want to make sure you're protected. You've been through so much, and I don't want to see you hurt again. I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the weight of her concern. I appreciate that more than you know. But I need you to approach this with an open mind. Arthur is a good man, and what we're exploring is real and meaningful. I'll try, Sophie said, though her expression remained skeptical. But I make no promises about being easy on him. If he's going to be part of your life, he's going to have to prove himself worthy of you. Saturday evening, Arthur and I arrived at Sophie's house together, a decision that felt both natural and significant. I'd been nervous about this meeting all week, but Arthur seemed calm and prepared, carrying himself with the quiet confidence that had always attracted me to him. Remember, I said as we walked up the front steps of Sophie's suburban home, she's protective because she cares. Don't take her questions personally. I understand. And I appreciate that she wants to make sure you're making good choices. It speaks well of her character and your relationship. Sophie opened the door wearing a simple but elegant dress. Her professional demeanor softened for the evening but still present. Dr. Arthur, welcome to my home. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please call me Arthur. And thank you for inviting me. I know this situation is unusual and I respect your concern for Marie. She led us to the dining room, where she'd set an elegant table with flowers and candles. The atmosphere was warm but formal, designed to encourage honest conversation. I hope you don't mind, but I've prepared some questions. I believe in being direct about important matters. Arthur smiled, and I was pleased to see that he seemed genuinely at ease. I'd be disappointed if you hadn't. Marie is fortunate to have someone who cares about her well-being so deeply. Sophie settled into her chair and I could see her shifting into the analytical mode that had made her successful in business. Tell me about your relationship with Marie 30 years ago. I want to understand the foundation of what you're building now. Arthur leaned forward slightly, his expression serious and respectful. We met in graduate school. Marie was completing her advanced nursing degree, and I was finishing my doctoral program in psychology. We were both serious about our studies, but we found in each other a connection that went beyond academic compatibility. What kind of connection? Intellectual, emotional, spiritual. We shared similar values about service and making a positive impact in the world. We spent hours talking about our goals, our dreams, our vision for the future. I watched Sophie's face as Arthur spoke, seeing her evaluate not just his words, but his manner, his sincerity. And why did you separate? I was offered a position across the country, an opportunity to join a prestigious practice that would have been impossible to refuse. We thought the distance would be temporary, that we'd find a way to make the relationship work. But you didn't. No. The demands of establishing my career were more intense than I'd anticipated. Communication became difficult, and over time we lost touch. Arthur's voice carried genuine regret. It remains one of the greatest regrets of my life. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then asked, "And now you've reconnected. What makes you think it will work this time?" Arthur looked at me, then back at Sophie, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. Because we're different people now. We have a better understanding of what matters, what we're willing to sacrifice, and what we're not. We're not trying to recreate the past. We're trying to build something new based on what we've learned. What are your intentions toward Marie? The question was direct, almost challenging, and I felt myself tense. My intentions are to explore whether we can build a meaningful relationship that honors both our individual growth and our shared history. I care about her deeply and I want to support her in whatever way she needs. Arthur's voice was steady, professional, even in this personal moment. I don't take this lightly. I understand the responsibility that comes with caring for someone who has experienced loss and is navigating health concerns. Sophie studied his face and I could see her evaluating his sincerity. You're not going to hurt her? You're not going to disappear again when things get difficult? Not intentionally. But I can't promise that exploring this relationship won't involve some emotional risk for both of us. That's the nature of any meaningful connection. Arthur paused, then added, "What I can promise is that I'll be honest with her, that I'll communicate openly about my feelings and concerns, and that I'll never take her trust for granted." That's an honest answer. I try to be honest, especially about important matters. Sophie turned to me, her expression softer but still serious. "And you, Marie? What do you need from this relationship?" I thought about her question, appreciating the opportunity to articulate my feelings. I need to know that I'm valued for who I am now, not who I was 30 years ago. I need to feel like I'm moving forward, not backward into some fantasy of youth. I paused, glancing at Arthur. And I need to know that this connection can coexist with the life I've built, including my relationship with you. I won't sacrifice the family I have for the possibility of romance. And if it can't coexist, Then we'll figure out how to navigate that challenge. But I believe it's possible to honor both the past and the present. Sophie was quiet for several minutes, and I could see her processing everything she'd heard. Finally, she said, I can see that you care about each other, and I can see that you're both approaching this thoughtfully with awareness of the complexities involved. She looked directly at Arthur. But I need you to understand that if this relationship causes Marie any harm, emotional or otherwise, I will hold you responsible. She's been through enough pain. Arthur nodded gravely. I understand. And I appreciate your protectiveness. Marie is fortunate to have someone who cares about her well-being so deeply. She is precious to me, Sophie said simply. She's precious to me too. She always has been. The sincerity in Arthur's voice seemed to reach something in Sophie's expression, and I saw her posture relax slightly. All right, I'm willing to support this cautiously, but I want regular check-ins. I want to know how you're both doing, and I want to be involved in any major decisions that might affect Marie's well-being. Of course, I said, feeling relief wash over me. We wouldn't want it any other way. Arthur stood up and extended his hand to Sophie. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain myself. I know this situation is unusual and I respect your concern for Marie. Sophie shook his hand and I could see her evaluating his character one more time. Don't thank me yet. You still have to prove that you deserve her trust, but I'm willing to give you the opportunity to do that. I plan to spend whatever time we have together doing exactly that. 3 months later, Arthur and I attended the annual fundraising gala for the clinic's charitable foundation. It wasn't a wedding, but it felt like a public declaration of our commitment to each other, a way of announcing to Arthur's professional community that we were building something together. The grand ballroom was filled with Arthur's colleagues, community leaders and supporters of the clinic's charitable work. The atmosphere was elegant and sophisticated with flowers, soft lighting and a jazz ensemble playing in the background. Are you nervous? Arthur asked as we walked into the ballroom together, his hand steady on my arm. A little, but also excited. I was wearing a deep blue dress that Sophie had helped me choose, something that brought out my eyes and made me feel confident. Arthur looked distinguished in his tuxedo, carrying himself with the quiet authority that had always attracted me to him. This feels like the future we talked about all those years ago, building something meaningful together. It does, he agreed, his voice warm with satisfaction. Contributing to something larger than ourselves while also nurturing what we've found together. The evening was perfect in ways I hadn't expected. Arthur gave a speech about the clinic's mission, and I found myself falling in love with his passion for helping others all over again. Listening to him speak about the importance of compassionate care, about the Foundation's work with underserved populations, I saw the idealistic young man I'd first fallen in love with, now mature and successful, but still driven by the same desire to make a difference. During the dancing, he held me close and whispered, I've been thinking about what comes next for us, about where we go from here. What do you mean? I mean, I'd like to make this official. Not just dating, but a real partnership. Building a life together in whatever way feels right for us. My heart skipped, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement. Are you proposing? I'm saying that I want to spend whatever time we have left together, building something beautiful and meaningful. If you'll have me. I looked into his eyes. These blue eyes that had captivated me 30 years ago and were still capable of making me feel like the most important person in the world. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'd like that very much. The band was playing a slow song, and as we danced, I felt like we were the only two people in the room. Around us, people were celebrating the clinic's success and the Foundation's impact. But I was celebrating something even more precious. The chance to love and be loved again, to build something beautiful with someone who had known me before I became who I was supposed to be. The opportunity to create a future that honored both our past and our present. I love you, Marie, Arthur said softly, his voice barely audible over the music. I love you too, I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. I never stopped loving you. As the evening wound down, Sophie approached us, her expression warm and genuinely happy. You two look radiant, she said, like two people who've found exactly what they were looking for. We have, I said, feeling grateful for her support. I'm glad. Arthur, I owe you an apology. I was harder on you than I needed to be when we first met. You were protecting someone you love. I respect that, and I would have done the same in your position. Well, I can see that you love her too. And that's what matters most. She hugged us both, and I felt the last piece of my new life fall into place. Congratulations on finding each other again. Not everyone gets a second chance like this. Later, as Arthur and I sat in the clinic's garden under the stars, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The health scare that had led me to counseling, the unexpected recognition, the careful rebuilding of trust and connection. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd found each other sooner? I asked. Sometimes, but I think we needed to become who we are now before we could appreciate what we have. Arthur's voice was thoughtful, philosophical. We needed to experience loss and growth and the full complexity of adult life before we could build something lasting. What do we have now? A love that's been tested by time and distance and life's complications. A connection that's survived separation and different choices, and the kind of growth that can either bring people together or drive them apart. I leaned against him, feeling content in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I think you're right. We're not the same people we were 30 years ago, but somehow we're still compatible. Maybe more compatible than we were then. Are you happy, Marie? Really, truly happy? Yes. For the first time in a very long time, I'm genuinely happy. Not just content or satisfied, but truly joyful. And as we sat there together under the stars, I realized that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for, even if you have to wait 30 years. Sometimes love finds a way to survive time and distance and the choices that seem to separate us forever. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that take decades to unfold.